to Living and Aging with Pride. My name is James Brown, and I've got my co-host in the room with me, Amelia. How are you today, Amelia?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. Did you have a nice Thanksgiving?
It was good. It was busy. I got hit with the flu, so it was pretty uneventful, but I'm alive, so it's good.
Well, we've got a wonderful guest here. We've got Andrea Himoff here, who is, what do you do, by the way?
What on earth do I do? What do I not do, really,
All
is
of
the
the
question,
above.
right?
That's why I asked that question.
It's hard to explain. I'm the executive director and co-founder of a group called Action Utah, which helps Utahns, in particular, get civically engaged from both sides of the aisle in order to impact the issues that they care about most.
Whoa, and we're talking today a little bit about ERPO, which is Extreme Risk Protection Orders, and I know for a fact that suicide is devastating this country through a number of means. Guns, one of them. Our seniors are having suicidal problems themselves.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
But this bill is a big move for you guys. Tell us why.
So this bill is, it's a challenging bill that has incredible support across the nation and here in Utah from, again, Democrats, Republicans, and gun owners to prevent suicides. And it's a research-based bill that has been around for over 20 years that shows significant reductions in suicide. But it's challenging because of the word firearms. Firearms is in this bill.
17 states already like the idea, got the law in place.
That's right.
And Utah is struggling to deal with it because we like to go hunting.
You know, yeah, in Utah here, we like our guns, and I think that's great. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And I think that as we've approached this particular bill to address our own suicide issues here in Utah, we have the 6th highest suicide rate in the nation.
Yes.
For a public health issue that is entirely preventable and needs many, many solutions to tackle it, this being one of them. But this particular policy has been crafted with the idea of we should protect Second Amendment rights. This is not about taking away guns. This is about protecting our right to bear arms.
It's about putting an intelligent point of view to the handling and preservation of using guns and so forth. I mean, everybody seems to want to talk about the why, when, where. It's the how that we need to be looking at if we're going to really circumvent this problem. Is that correct?
Well, that is definitely one piece of it. So like I said, it's a complicated problem, suicide, right? There's mental health components, there's behavioral health components, there's, there's altitude, is one of the potential contributors to suicidality.
And you got to explain that to me now.
So altitude, there's all these studies that show that states with higher altitudes have higher rates of suicidality. And so there is a contribution probably from I believe it's from the oxygen content in the air that can
You're
impact
high
depression.
on the high, right?
Yeah, so I mean, to say there's one perfect solution would be erroneous and I think a real disservice to suicide prevention across the country. Some of it is cultural, and we need to let people know that if they are in crisis, it's okay to talk about it, right? Yeah. So when we talk about the red flag law or the extreme risk protective order law, that is tackling one piece, and one piece that is the means. Firearms are by far the most lethal means for suicide. There are many other means that people try, but firearms here in Utah contribute to half of the suicides, and firearms are by far the most lethal, and we know that if people survive a suicide attempt, 90% of those people will
won't
not
try it again.
Well, they won't go on to die by suicide even if they do try again.
Right.
Because removing that most lethal means at the time of crisis is what can save a life. Mm-hmm. So we're not talking about removing them permanently. We're talking about creating space and distance.
Talking about managing it more than anything else.
Yeah, just in that moment of crisis, right? So sometimes that moment can pass in a really brief period. It can be a week or two, and that moment is gone, and that person can then have their firearm returned to them. So the whole point is that when a person is in crisis, they should not be near a lethal means because the impetus can be so fast. Yeah. But when you create that space and distance, they can get through the crisis and then return to a place where they are safe to be with a firearm and won't harm themselves or others. It's really that simple.
It's really scary that we find all of these pieces to the puzzle of a good life and a happy life and a quality life that intervenes and comes in, and especially from a psychological standpoint, you wonder what's making people do this, and then you find these things you can manage, and we have a problem with managing. What's wrong with you? Wake up.
I think that we have a lot of problems in our society with helping people through crisis, right? And so there are services available. They're hard to access. They're hard to get to. They're hard to know you need them.
Right.
And sometimes these extreme risk protective orders, which are just a protective order like other protective orders that we have, like for domestic violence, for instance, that have been in place forever. One benefit of this one is that they find from the states that have them in place that almost half of the people who are served these orders and have not been receiving behavioral health services prior will then be able to after being served an order. So not only do they save lives, not only do they protect Second Amendment rights, they also get people in crisis the services that they need. It provides this pathway to those services.
Because I know we hear the news, Amelia, and at the end of the news, well, we find that so-and-so has got a psychological problem, or they're going through bullying, or whatever the case might be. I mean, this particular protective law has really had some impact on some of these school shootings.
That's right. Yeah, a lot of the laws that have been passed across the country have come in the wake of a school shooting, and one very famously was in Florida in 2018. The legislature there considered passing a red flag law and did not pass it in January. The Parkland shooting tragically happened in February, and a few weeks later they passed the red flag law. And after that passed, there was, a court challenge to it, as there have been, throughout the decades. And once again, courts have upheld this law as being consistent with the Second Amendment and with the Fourth Amendment, with the 14th Amendment, and that's what some critics, they can have sort of a knee-jerk reaction, and I don't blame people. I cherish the right to bear arms. I think it's really important that we're following our constitutional rights to due process, to search and seizure. And these laws are crafted really, really carefully to make sure that we're not trotting on our constitutional rights, that we're really protecting them. And to that aim, this particular bill in Utah, which has been tried a couple of times here and will run again this year, this one has been developed with a huge group of stakeholders to make sure everyone's really legitimate, complicated concerns are being thought of. So it's suicide prevention, mental health, public health, domestic violence, courts, law enforcement, gun owners. They've all come together and contributed to crafting a really delicate, balanced bill that meets the needs of Utahns.
I mean, you would think that with all of this, that we would be willing to at least initiate a plan that, whether it's 90% stopping the problem or 1%, it doesn't make a difference. If we can take action to do something to prevent this process from happening, anything we do is better than nothing at all.
Yeah, would you like to save a life? Here is a proven way to do that. And in these particular bills, we have enough research to show kind of how much that means. I mean, we know that in some states it's 7.5 to 13.5%. I mean, that's about 1 in 10 firearm suicides prevented through this bill. And would we like to save that here in Utah with 50% of our suicides being perpetrated with a firearm? I would like to.
Yeah. So how does it work? So in Utah, I would imagine we kind of have more of like the sandwich generation, right? Where like we either have kids living with us or we have our parents living with us. So if we have like a parent who's suicidal or we have a kid that's suicidal, how does that, I guess, come into effect with the law?
And we're finding more grandmothers and grandfathers taking care of kids these days because a lot of young parents are in trouble, having issues. So it's crossing all of these age barriers one way or the other. So it's something that we need to really concentrate on and deal with, and it's scary. It's really scary.
It can be really scary, and I think what's really scary right now is that there is not a mechanism in place. So say I'm a mom, my kids are not 18 yet, and they don't own guns because they're not 18, right?
Do you own a gun?
I do not currently, but I have owned them in the past.
Okay.
My father used to own a gun company, actually, and my whole family is hunters. I feel comfortable with guns. I mean, I feel comfortable with people owning guns. I've handled them. I've gotten NRA badges at summer camp shooting guns, so I
That's going to be another show. We talk about your NRA badge.
my
and
NRA
Action
badges.
Utah.
Yeah.
Whoa, what a partnership that is.
Right, exactly. And the bill sponsor, is a gun owner, is a concealed carry permit holder. These are not people who are extremists who are trying to remove guns from society. That's not what's happening here. I forget what your question was.
I was just wondering,
It's the generations,
right?
right?
If you, have a kid who can't go purchase their own gun, but you have a gun as a family, how does that law help, with the family not allowing the gun access to the kid who might be suicidal or
Okay,
whatnot?
yeah, and I think that's one of those really complicated pieces, right? If my kids are underage and I own a gun, it's my responsibility
To,
to
like,
keep
protect them,
that gun
away from
locked
them,
up.
sidetrack. So, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago to a year ago, was the hospital giving out gun locks to parents of kids that were coming in and exhibiting any type of suicidal symptom? Is that familiar?
Gun locks are being given out through
Everywhere?
suicide
Okay.
prevention groups. Yes, healthcare, absolutely. I mean, there was a good bill that ran this last year to provide them publicly with state funding.
Okay.
We need to keep our guns safe. And I think as a culture in Utah, we need to have the culture of we are good gun owners who keep our guns safe.
Yeah.
Gun safes, even better. Gun safes with a completely unidentifiable combination to get in, way better than one where your kid may do everything possible to figure out how to get in there, right?
Yeah.
Because they can.
Yeah.
So we want to be really safe about that. And if you have a suicidal kid in your home, give your guns to someone else to hold on to for a while.
Yeah.
Just get them
Well,
away.
and
Again,
even,
it's
like,
space
parents,
and distance. Sure.
Right? I mean, I work with so many older people, and I feel like, you've been married for 60 years, and then your spouse dies, and your health is declining. And I hear all the time people that end up going to Jerry Sykes, the suicidal comments of, like, I just want to be done.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, like, as families, we don't look at our older adults as, like, the risk factor of them committing suicide just because
But
it's your
they
parent and you
are.
don't really think about it that way. But I feel like it's a more and more pressing issue that we need to, like, open our eyes to.
It is. So, there's both sides of the equation, right? So we want to keep our kids safe by giving them that space and distance between a firearm, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with our parents. And aging parents who experience any cognitive illnesses, that's a particular problem if they're gun owners. And we've seen that through the data on these red flag bills and how they're being used across the nation. And that is one of the groups they're being used for because of depression or confusion that can be caused by these cognitive illnesses. There have been some incidences and there have been some preventions,
Yeah.
and so this is a really good application of that. But here in Utah, we don't have that mechanism. There is nothing we can do for that aging parent. We are not allowed to remove their guns, right? And law enforcement can't remove their guns. And so that's a problem, number one, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm a parent with a child who is of age, who is a gun owner, who does not live in my home, and I am more sure than not, the evidence is more clear that this person is more likely than not to kill themselves. My baby, my kid, who's 18 or 19 or 20 or whatever, 45, we have no mechanism to help that person. We have no mechanism to remove that firearm from a situation where they are more likely than not to shoot themselves with a firearm.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah.
we're listening to Andrea Himoff, and she's with the Action Utah group, and we're talking about extreme risk protection orders, better known as ERPO, and there's a bill active. We're going to take a break. This is a wonderful show about helping you make the right kinds of decision. And Andrea is here is going to tell us her website so you can go to it, so you can support and or find out how to support the issues and the causes that they are adamantly trying to help facilitate making your life better. That's what we're talking about. Living and aging with pride. Even though you're a young person, we want you to live a long time. So we're going to be right back after this. We're going to continue this conversation because we want you to know everything. That's what I'm talking about.